Multipolarity is not a stable equilibrium. Unipolarity is stable. The question is who's going to be the unipolar hegemon into the future. You have either Russia, China, you got communist China, fascist Russia, liberal America. Those are your three choices for all intents and purposes. So
okay, let's break that down. So you say unipolarity is stable. Okay, sorry. And then you're saying multipolarity is not stable, something that is coming into being now. Well,
they can both be unstable, but
don't interrupt me, Kevin. I didn't interrupt you, so don't interrupt me. We can play this ugly game. You won't win. So, Kevin, you American unipolarity you claim is stable, which is patently false. It's the source. It's the number one source of geopolitical instability in the modern world as of now. Now, we don't know what kind of stability a multipolar order is going to have, but what we do know is that neither China nor Russia, whether it's from the perspective of their immediate self-interest, which is what we're talking about, or, I know you're cynical. Most people are cynical. They don't buy it. Is from the perspective of a moral and value and traditional perspective. Whichever way you look from it, they have no ambitions to adopt the mantle of American unipolarity. Actually, Chinese theorists have talked about how American unipolarity is the very source of America's demise. It's a contradiction, an imminent contradiction that has led to the deindustrialization of America and has led to the current political crisis within America. Chinese thinkers are very, very well attuned to that fact, and they do not want to seize the mantle of American unipolarity because they know the ultimate consequence of that would be the destruction of their own country internally. So they focus on an internal developmentalist model, and then on the economic level, win-win agreements between sovereign countries without encroaching on the sovereignty of any country. So it's simple as that.
So you think that it was a win-win when they ruined Sri Lanka's economy or Kenya or any of these countries where they go into... We
can actually talk about the Sri Lankan economy. What actually happened in the case of Sri Lanka is that Sri Lanka got itself into a hole because of the IMF and because of Western loans, and that the Sri Lankan government wanted to enter into a partnership with China concerning one port. And China's role in Sri Lanka's economy was completely minuscule. And yet foreign observers have harped on the case of Sri Lanka just because it's a case in which China has entered into an economic agreement with a country based on a port when that country's economy was in dire states because of its own government. It's not China's fault Sri Lanka has a shitty government. China's not going to impose its own good governance on other countries. So when countries have shitty governments, it's the Chinese will deal with them. It's not their business. They're not going to intervene and instill what they consider a preferable government. And that's true for Kenya. That's true for Africa. So if you think that deals between China and Africa aren't fair for African people, that's the business of those people. They should overthrow their government and renegotiate new terms. There's actually examples of this in history. When the Syriza government got into power in Greece, there was a really shitty deal with China concerning the sale of a Greek port, and the Greek workers were not really getting much out of it. Syriza brought the Chinese officials and negotiated them on new terms in a way that benefited Greece. And the Chinese were very hospitable. They were very generous in giving the Greek government what they wanted. So again, it's not China's fault. It's these corrupt governments' fault. And it's the business of the people to attend to their own country, attend to their own government. It's not China's business.
So China takes advantage of countries that have weak political leadership or big corruption, and they're very interested in buying off their support, like at the United Nations for recognition against Taiwan, for example. Sri Lanka and Kenya are two examples of where they basically got them indentured into these debt contracts where they knew that they wouldn't be able to actually pay it off for infrastructure they didn't really exactly need. And now China basically owns this port, and China's going to own the railway and everything over in Kenya. What it is it amounts to, you like to use the term imperialism, but what China's doing with the Belt and Road is Beijing-centric imperialism. It's infrastructure projects that really only China needs, and it's touted as this win-win. But at the end of the day, the only people that win from it are corrupt politicians that sign the deals with the CCP and the Communist Party in China. You mentioned good governance. They're literally committing a genocide right now in Xinjiang, as well as running a police state that just banned video games, for example, and banned femboys.
Let's rein it in a little bit and go one by one, because this is a lot of claims. So the first thing you're talking about when it comes to China's exploitative and predatory relationship to corrupt and bad governments, this would make sense if it wasn't for the fact that China is continually offering poor countries debt relief. They just gave poor countries 2.1 billion in debt relief. China's been very understanding with these countries and their inability to pay off loans. And I can't see how you could describe that relationship as predatory or China taking advantage whatsoever. I think China has been following the ethics of its Confucian civilization and basically coming to an understanding with other countries that it's not going to act like a savage barbarian like Anglo-Saxon civilizations have, like Britain, which outright looted and completely took over and colonized countries and treated them like a pirate treats its booty. And in the case of America, which has either behind the scenes orchestrated regime changes, coups, sowed instability and division and turmoil, or has just outright invaded countries in order to impose its own specific political system. I mean, even if we were to accept the maximal extent of your accusations against China in relation to other countries, it's nowhere near the crimes, depravity, and barbarism of Anglo-Saxon so-called civilization. Now, as to the second claim regarding the Uyghur genocide, I'm going to go ahead and say there is no genocide against Uyghurs within China. So if we want to pursue that specific line of argumentation and debate, we can go down that road too. Now, regarding China's recent cultural policies, banning video games and banning kind of K-pop and more promoting masculinity within its country, I think that's absolutely fucking beautiful. I think that's why a lot of people are starting to wake up and realize that China's the most based Chad country on fucking planet Earth. And I wish America was the same way.
So yeah, you basically the problem here, right? So the problem here is you mentioned that the U.S. has done interventions and all this kind of stuff too. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate of that. I'm an interventionist. I'm not going to deny that. It matters what you're intervening on behalf of. So if you're intervening to promote liberalism, democracy, and basically Western values, that's a good thing. When China goes out in the world, they prop up these regimes that they have no interest in reforming, that are basically puppet states. Like you mentioned, the debt relief. That's another tactic that they use to bring these countries under their heel to get them on their side against Taiwan and the free world.
You can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, the only reason I brought up debt relief is because you're accusing China of taking advantage of vulnerable countries. So when China is actually doing the opposite, now you can go ahead and shift the tune to saying that this is a tactic to prop up puppet governments. Now you're saying that China is not reforming these countries' governments. It's not, because China is actually being true to the so-called Western democratic values of the 17th and 18th and 19th century, according to which you don't, it's the people of a country who decide their own fate, not foreigners. Foreigners are not going to decide the fate of a country. That it's the business and belonging of the people living in that country to choose their own destiny and choose their own fate. It's not China's business to choose what government people are going to have. Now, regarding American intervention, I'm actually going to contest the claim that America has ever intervened on behalf of so-called liberalism, freedom, and democracy. It's just patently not true. In each specific case of U.S. intervention, we can locate a web of private interests. And in addition to private interests, general interests of the U.S. foreign policy in maintaining its global economic order. Now, it can cloud that in the phrases of liberty and other ideological mishmash. But the truth is that U.S. intervention, if it was premised on the basis of spreading liberal values and whatnot, there's a whole host of U.S. allies who we would have invaded, who we don't, because we don't actually care about so-called liberalism and democracy. We care about maintaining the post-Bretton Woods system that was initiated in the 1970s, which is the backbone of global order as the U.S. sees it. Now, as a final point, I know this is kind of veering off a little bit. I really actually wouldn't even grant you the claim that you're a neoconservative and that this actually represents what your position is. I think, Kevin, I think you're actually an anarchist. I think you're adopting a position so utterly foreign and removed not only from the time period in which we live, but from the basic sensibilities of almost everyone who lives in this country, America, that it is akin to just get, displaying a middle finger in front of everyone around you. Like, you're basically saying, fuck society. Like, everyone's wrong about the neocons actually being having disastrous policies and leading us to a really bad situation. I'm actually going to be in favor of that. Well, you're really a tiny minority, and it's almost like it's kind of like a rebellion, right? It's really anarchistic. It's just, you may as well be like a anarcho-primitivist. That's how like outlandish your position is in relation to the current reality.
So I like the comparison to anarchy because, like, I'm an advocate. I recommend Hobbes to people. I'm a statist. Anarchists, if you haven't looked, they don't like me. They're not really fans of me. I don't call myself a neocon anymore. I use the term liberal hawk or liberal unilateralist, or you even say like a progressive war hawk. For me, and when I'm interested in, at the end of the day, it's like obviously it's Western hegemony because, like I said, multipolarity is not, it's not stable. It's not a sustainable equilibrium in the long run. You mentioned how, well, we're going to see how it plays out now, but we can look to the past, Haz, and we can actually see how multipolarity played out before. Great example, the run up to World War I, the world was very multipolar. Power was dispersed amongst a lot of great powers. There was a lot of trade, and it led to a huge war. We can look at World War II. The run up to that was multipolar.
I think you're confused. So, a few things, right? I don't believe you call yourself anarchist ideologically. You obviously don't identify with that. But I think in practical terms, like when it comes to the practical reality, you are indistinguishable from an anarchist. That was really
I'm
my
a
point.
statist, though.
Now, yeah, but you call yourself, I mean, look, a lot of people call themselves statists who are in actual practical reality anarchists because it's about the relationship you have to the current state, not the one you have in your head. But anyway, it's not relevant. Now, the second thing, the major problem with what you're saying here regarding multipolarity is that polarity is a very specific concept that doesn't just refer to who's in charge. A global system as such did not exist before American unipolarity. You could call that imperialism. There was many competing and rivaling imperialist powers, but polarity as such, which refers to a great deal more than just who's the big guy in town, didn't even exist in the first place.
Right. So I studied international relations in school. Multipolarity refers to the poles in the system. So we could talk about pre-World War I.
Right.
You had Austria.
There was no system. There was no.
No, but there was a world system. When I say world system, no. When I say world system, Haz, this is important. This is an important definition. I'm not talking about like some ordered structure like the UN or something. I'm talking about the order of the world, not like there's some dude who says you do this.
There was none.
No. But you're missing what I'm saying. So we can talk about the universe. We can talk about the solar system as a system. It doesn't mean that there's police to enforce anything. It's a system.
No. I know what you're trying to say. It's not a formal. I'm not saying it's just a formal system. I'm saying a world system as such only emerged after the U.S. Period of unipolarity after World War II. Before then, there was no real shared world as we know it. European powers were competing for the mantle of what we would call world hegemony. Now,
that was a multipolar order. You had
no.
It was multipolar. It was multipolar.
It's an important distinction, right? And we can go to the economic details if you want and why this is. But European powers were competing for the mantle, the one singular mantle of what we can call polarity proper, because polarity is not just how much leverage or power you have in relation to other countries. Polarity actually refers to a specific kind of economic relationship to the world. In what way do you represent a polar orientation, a center around which various countries kind of satellites for? So, for example, in the case of the U.S., the reason we call it unipolarity is because of obviously the Bretton Woods system and the specific system of the recycling of the U.S. dollar and the recycling of American surpluses and profits to develop other countries. This situated America as the single pole of the world. But similar relations and wars between currency and currency politics are now emerging, which is why we call it multipolarity. We don't just call it multipolarity because America's losing, its unilateral power. It's because there are various different economic poles that are emerging in the world, which represent the decentralization of the world system that emerged after World War II. So it's a very important distinction.
So you're basically using like Marxian sort of language here to describe polarity. I'm talking about in international relations.
I didn't use any concept unique or exclusive to Marxism whatsoever. I mean,
you're missing the point, though. We're not really so much talking about economics here. We're talking about the distribution of power in the world in the run up to World War One, you can say, oh, well, they were all competing for who's the top dog. There was no top dog yet. It was multipolar. It was dispersed between different capitals.
There was no acknowledgement before in World War One of different poles. There were no poles. There was not even one pole that was established yet. So there couldn't be different poles. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
World War One. By that logic, there couldn't have been rocks before a few thousand years ago because we didn't have a term to define rocks. So therefore, everything in the universe didn't exist until humans gave a definition to it. You can go back and describe a condition as something.
Reel it back a little bit, okay? You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing.
No, but this is a tactic that you'll often do.
You're overcomplicating it. You're overcomplicating it.
Haz, this is a tactic that I've seen you do.
Okay, I'm not saying
on numerous times,
Kevin.
Where you'll take something that happened in the past.
Kevin, don't make this difficult. Kevin,
no, and you'll try to deny it. Based on, oh, well, they didn't use the current term for it. The term that I'm using,
Kevin, you're hurting yourself.
Is literally accurate to the state of the world order in the run up to World War One, World War Two. The only one embarrassing themselves here is you, dude.
We're gonna simplify this to save time, Kevin. No one is saying that the reason we should not describe the word polarity to describe the pre-World War II state of the world, not just pre-World War One, is because there wasn't a concept for it back then. I'm saying that polarity refers to an intelligibly different system, an intelligibly different. It's a concept whose object is intelligibly different, to the point where we could say, even if we didn't have the word for it back then, it still had not yet emerged. And I kind of explained that in the form of the Bretton Woods system and the relationship between industrial centers of power and hinterlands and so on and so on. Like, for example, now this is the relationship Germany has to Southern Europe, right, within the form of the EU. So that's a pole. You can call it a pole. But regardless, like, I think you just don't understand what is actually being said here. So you talk about rocks in the universe and stuff, really just embarrassing yourself.
No, it's because you're trying to say that we can't qualify the state of the world order in the run up to World War One as multipolar because people at the time didn't call it multipolar. No. But it is multipolar. It meets the definition in international relations of multipolarity. Polarity in international relations.
I think we need to go back to school.
Distribution of power in which two states.
Did you just listen to what I said or not?
Or multiple states. But here's the point, Haz.
I'm telling you, it has nothing to do with it. There's actually
you're just trying to be an economic reductionist. It's about more than economics. It's about power. Because every time you say, "Oh, well, no, that can't be a polar relation,"
you don't have to use the word polarity. Then use a different word. Just say unilateralism or bilateralism, or you can say.
Well, no, that is a state's relation to other states. Yeah, that's not about the world order, though.
You can use decentralized power. You can say there's no one singular power or something. But there's no need to use the word polarity if you don't even know what that concept is referring to.
No, but the irony here is you don't know in international relations what polarity refers to. I'm going to bring up the definition of polarity.
Polarity is tied to world system theory, which is tied to thinkers like Immanuel Wallerstein and others. I'm very familiar with the literature on the subject, Kevin. And
but it doesn't sound like it. But it doesn't sound like it.
Polarity refers to a great deal more than just power, okay? If you don't understand that, I don't think you went to school.
That's ridiculous. You're in law school, and you're in law school, to my understanding, and your reduction of these definitions to try to comply with your specific view is super cringy and wouldn't hold up in court. It wouldn't hold up in court. Let's
look past definitions, because you're not going to agree on what polarity means, because you don't know.
Well, no, I'm literally telling you in international relations, polarity refers to distribution of power in the world system.
Shut up. If we have a Kevin, if we have a semantic difference that we need to overcome, the best course of action is to just agree we're not going to agree about what the meaning of the word polarity is, and go to the relevant, differently intelligible objects that are under contention. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a identifiable reason why multipolarity would not mean the return to the pre-World War I system. Now, you can say that both are multipolar orders, something I would disagree with, but even if I were to grant you that, it still doesn't make a difference, because I'm making the current emerging multipolar order intelligibly different in a way that doesn't allow us to equate it to the pre-World War I order. In that case, multipolarity would be inessential to comparing them, because there is something that differentiates them that I am elevating to the status of an essence. Okay, so I know you have a hard time like debating, but you really got to follow the course of argumentation, because you waste a lot of time over semantics that don't matter.
So here we go with the whole Anglo box thing again. Definitions don't matter unless Haas is using the definitions, then they matter.
Did you just hear what I said? It's not about whether the definitions matter or not. It's about what is essential as the point of contention in this argument. And just because you want to think that they're the same, just because you want to think that they are the same because you're calling them the same,
I'm not saying they're the exact same. I'm saying they're both
ways in which
characterized
as I've
by
qualified.
multipolarity.
Kevin, shut up.
You shut up, Oz. I'm literally telling you that they're
I'm the
both.
Here. Kevin, I'm the dominant male. Shut up.
Defined by multipolarity. No, you, Haas. No, you, Haas. What are you gonna do? Start chipping out?
Kevin, you're gonna get yourself in trouble. Don't fight it. Just accept it. Listen, Kevin.
Dude.
Kevin, listen. I need you to understand something. This has nothing to do with definitions. I'm raising a point that you're not addressing. You're just saying they're the same without addressing the ways in which I've described to you how they're not the same. So can we actually
Well, no, you're just trying to say that the semantics don't matter anymore because you lost on the semantics. I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing.
But you didn't win over the semantics, dude. Have you studied world system theory? Have you studied
the multipolarity? The multipolarity of the pre-World War I era
you're trying
is the
to talk
same
about,
as the multipolarity.
Kevin, I'm trying to help you.
This coming era.
And you're
what I'm saying is,
okay. All right, go. Haas, say what you're gonna say.
Yeah, all I'm trying to say is that no, I'm not conceding as to your point about the meaning of multipolarity. You're talking out of your fucking ass. You don't know what you're talking about. You sound embarrassing. But if you really want to cling and stubbornly cling to that point, I'm doing you a favor. If we're not going to agree about what the word multipolarity means, we can just address the point of contention under which the word was being used to describe for. Now, I described the emerging multipolar order as qualitatively different than the one before World War I, and I actually backed that up with some kind of content. I actually said why it's different, and I'm elevating that to an essential point of distinction. You're not acknowledging the distinction whatsoever. You're just going back to the contention over the meaning of the word multipolarity. Why do you I think you're dwelling in a semantical difference because you're actually scared to argue over what we're really trying to talk about in the first
place. No. We can talk about the current order emerging. We can talk about that too. What I was saying before we went into this was that multipolarity is not stable. Now, I wasn't saying that the multipolarity that's emerging now is the same as that which existed before World War I. What I'm saying is it's not a stable equilibrium, and it will give way to a unipolar hegemon. And usually how that happens is a world war. So
I'll break down your logical incoherence so that you could, like, it's all on the table. You could see why you're not very smart. So, Kevin, let me explain it to you like this. You are saying multipolar orders are not stable, and you're using the pre-World War I situation as evidence for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not saying they're the same. I'm just saying that order distribution is not a stable equilibrium.
Kevin, if you haven't noticed, I've understood everything you've said up to this point. I'm just trying to help you right now, right? Because I don't think you understand where I'm at. So I have put forward an argument about why the current emerging multipolar order would not be as unstable. It wouldn't have the essence of the instability of the pre-World War I one. And the reason for that is because in World War I, they were attempting to seize hegemony over the position that America would come to occupy after World War II. Now, I'm trying to say is that America's position is now being decentralized. We're not returning to a Hobbesian jungle in which we're going to fight over it once again. That's beyond us. The mantle of unipolarity held by America will never be held by anyone else ever again. So what I'm actually trying to say is a specific argument in a specific point. There's no need to keep dwelling in semantics when you haven't even addressed the point, which is, how can you argue that the current emerging multipolar order will be just as unstable as the order before World War I, when in fact there are qualitative differences I have pointed out that would probably lead us to believe that it wouldn't have that same instability.
Right. So you point out
To
differences.
be clear,
Dude,
I'm not arguing that it's impossible that there will be instability in the future because of the emerging multipolar order by any means. But I'm just saying you can't use World War I as evidence, because if it's going to be unstable, it's going to be unstable in a qualitatively different way.
okay. Well, my point was specifically about the instability of it. The reason why it's unstable and why you can say, well, there are different economic relations now. You can say that power is more decentralized now. Maybe there will be more polls than there were in the run up to World War I, where they were all concentrated in a similar geographic area. The point for me is that the world system has always been, and for the time being will be, anarchic. And what that means is that there's no real world police. People joke about America being the world police, but like realistically, if China does a genocide or Russia does some shit or Russia invades Ukraine, if nobody like the US intervenes, they get away with it. There's not like some world police that just step down and zap them magically. So the reason why it's going to be unstable is that you're still going to have that power vacuum at the international level. And so as much as you can say, well, nobody's going to have that hegemon that America has had, that title, I disagree with that. I would like to see America keep it. But the point is, whether it's China or it's Russia or it's a new power that emerges or a cluster of powers acting in cohesion, there is going to be a hegemon that emerges, because that's the only real stable equilibrium in the long run, and we'll continue having world wars until we get there. And you mentioned some qualitative differences in terms of the economic relations. You can talk about how, well, the world is more, I guess, more intertwined in terms of trade, except we had a higher percentage of world GDP comprised of trade before World War I.
That's not the argument, though. That's not the argument about
what's your argument, Haas?
Yeah, the argument is about the specific relationship between developing countries and developed countries, and specifically developing countries, which are no longer colonies that are going to be competed over to be directly plundered and looted and seized, but countries that require and need to take advantage of the differences in the concentration of capital in order to industrialize themselves. Now, in layman's speak, countries need the surpluses of production in the advanced countries in order to develop themselves. Otherwise, they're going to have to engage in their own kinds of, all-encompassing agricultural revolutions, as we saw in the Soviet Union and China, to adopt an independent path to modernity. But we know that this leads to a lot of social, political, and economic turmoil that most countries are not prepared to experience. And also, it also presupposes that they occupy a sufficiently large land mass and a lot of other things. But so, yeah, most countries rely on advanced countries in order to develop. Now, this is really the key to what separates the multipolar order from the order before World War I, is that it's not actually competition over colonies. And you have to understand that that's what was going on. They were competing over the resources and colonies and land space of the world, whether in Europe or beyond Europe. Specifically, there were competing industries requiring different raw materials and resources and so on and so on. So the situation is very different now, right? So instead of a war, you have to understand wars are political. War is an extension of politics and vice versa. It's Clausewitzian, right? Most states, at least formally, despite all neocolonialism, are sovereign countries now, right? So it doesn't make sense that wars are going to be waged for them, as in the case of both two world wars, because both world wars were about either sovereign disputes of sovereignty or lack thereof. So sovereignty is really the key. When you already have the sovereign states that countries like America and China are competing over in terms of the possessing economic relationships to, it's not the same and it's not comparable. Now, you're calling American unipolarity stable. Now, I kind of sounded like you're saying it's not stable, and I agree with you, it's not stable, right? So if it's already not stable, I don't see what the difference is going to be.
Well,
you're obviously not going to create a global order whatsoever, because a global order presupposes a center of power that's ruling over everyone. So I don't think that's even possible. But what I do think is that countries can pursue, in a way guided by China's example, not by force, not by political coercion or enshrining some kind of political hegemony in the form of military interventions and the threat of being invaded, but can follow China's example, both as a effective model of development for underdeveloped or developing countries, and as a way to conduct foreign relations. Now, believe it or not, cynical people will disagree with this, but for a long time in history, especially when it comes to states like China, foreign relations were not conducted on bond of the pure threat of force and extinction. Foreign relations followed traditions and customs based on mutual respect, that just lines are just not crossed based on some kind of minimal values, Confucian values in the case of China. So a return to this kind of status quo, even if it's a little bit utopian, is, I think, way more realistic and better to aspire to, as opposed to the kind of genocidal extinctionism of your anarchistic kind of LARP that you're putting up.
So the country that you're defending right now is literally conducting a genocide. I want to note for the record here that when we're talking about polarity and when we're talking about unipolarity and American hegemony, the reason why it's dwindling right now is actually it's a self-dwindling. It's the first time in history. The Romans never just gave up their empire by choice. The British didn't do it by choice. America is doing it.
Anything further, we just have to establish.
So I gotta talk.
There's not an Uyghur genocide.
The reason.
You made a claim we have to address.
No. The reason why America's hegemony is disappearing right now is because of the self-cucking by Washington. It's the first time in history that you've seen now I don't consider American empire, but you probably would. It's the first time you've seen an empire, so to speak, give up its own mantle, and that's because of these Russian memes and other countries' memes that are perpetrated within the country to make the American people hate themselves and hate their own interests abroad and support giving up power to China and Russia.
I don't know how many
Europe
layers of
and
insanity.
Central Asia.
Listen, I don't know how many layers of insanity we're on, so I just want to get some things clear. So first of all, China's not conducting a genocide. It's not been proven. There's no evidence for that. The most
that's not true.
The most they accuse it of doing is a cultural genocide, which itself is another thing they made up. Now, the second thing that you said was that the reason why America is in decline is not because it is collapsing under the weight of its own imminent contradictions, which is an argument that is far more coherent, far more defensible, and far more based in reality, but actually because for two reasons. One, they're not listening to Kevin Castley, right? Kevin Castley would really save Washington from the mess that it's in now. Now, the second reason,
and ironically, yes,
and I quote this ad verbatim, Russian memes. Can you please give me an example of these Russian memes that are leading to the demise of the American
So
empire?
the Internet Research Agency, for example, has run various different Facebook groups promoting the alt-right. Promoting the alt-right. So you literally asked for an example. I gave you an example of one of their institutions that's been doing that. It's the Internet Research Agency.
I'm asking for the memes. Can you show us the memes that are leading to the collapse of the American empire? Just like an example.
Well, you can see them on Twitter all the time. The idea that America's weak.
Show me one now. Show me one now.
I don't need specific memes. You know what I'm talking about. The disinformation, the disinformation campaign that's been waged by the Kremlin, Kremlin against Western democracies is the meme warfare that I'm talking about. It is literally the war.
So this is what we need. I'll tell you the
information
solution. First of all, I want you to show me one of these memes because I want to seize the memes because they have so much power. They can bring down an empire. Imagine what I could do with them, right?
So you deny the Internet Research Agency running different Facebook groups to pin the far right and the far left against each other in America to weaken American institutions and civil society.
I can address this in two prongs. Remember, I'm a loose.
Well, no. I mean, we're getting off topic right now.
Let's keep going. Don't backtrack.
What's worth noting here is that throughout all of this, you've proposed this.
We're going to address it. Let's not walk it back. Let's not walk it back.
This utterly economically reductionist understanding of international relations, which is incredibly simplistic, incredibly low IQ.
Let's not walk it back, Kevin. Let's go back to the memes. So two things. The Internet Research Agency, the groups that had found guilty of these, were so minuscule in relevance and significance, it's laughable. If you actually look at these.
But that's not true.
Yeah, they were.
That's not true, though.
And
They literally led to fight
Kevin,
in the streets.
Kevin, and the second thing, though, is that even if I were to agree with you that the Internet Research Agency had all these really widespread popular memes and it was really, reaching a lot of people on Facebook, remember that you said that Russian memes are responsible for the decline of the American empire. So
no, I said it was a factor in America giving up its own power in the world because the American people have been brainwashed on a diet of Russia Today and Michael Moore to hate themselves and hate their national interests and give up their position.
Americans love themselves when the deep state engages in foreign interventions.
Deep state? Wait. We're doing the memes. The deep state? Okay, Alex Jones. Okay, Alex Jones. Get out that tinfoil hat, Haas. Get out that tinfoil hat, Haas. My deep state. My deep state. No you. 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 No you.
You understand? I'm
no, you.
Here. You have to understand.
No, you. Kevin. You can't even grasp basic concepts. You want to talk about alpha. Your understanding of international relations is below a beta level. You're like gamma, dude. You're literally gamma at this point, dude. That's your understanding here. No, you. No, you. No, you. No, you. No, you.
Kevin,
no, you.
Let me ask you a question.
No, you.
So these memes, so you're saying the American people, they hate themselves when they're trying to address the problem of deindustrialization, joblessness, jobs moving overseas, and the opioid crisis. These are examples of America loving itself, but Americans are hating themselves when they want to give the country back to the people that premise it and that are responsible for it, and that actually
you're missing. You just stumbled on. Yo, Huz, so you just stumbled on one of the big points here, which was the industrial aspect to it. So your whole thing is like, oh, well, China, they have this model of self-development and all this kind of stuff. What you're missing is that the only reason why China isn't everybody making $2 a day right now as agrarian backwater is because of the West. We made communist China as rich as they are. Why? If we didn't do business with them, they would have nothing. They wouldn't even have kiwis, Kevin, as you say, Haas. They wouldn't even have kiwis. So we made them and we can end them. We made them and we can end them.
Kevin Castley, you are so adorable. Let me tell you something. You have to understand the history.
Yeah, recognize. A lot of people think I'm adorable. What up?
To understand the history.
Deal with it.
It's not a compliment.
Kevin, well, you know what, Haas?
Kevin, shut up,
How about it, Haas? Because
I'll
take it as a compliment, dude.
Shut up.
I'll take it as a compliment, dude.
Shut up. Daddy's talking. Listen.
Daddy's talking, dude. You have the mental comprehension.
I'm trying to refresh your point.
The mental comprehension of an 8-year-old. If you're a daddy, what did you do? Have sex when you were like 2 or some shit? You got a 4-year-old or you got a 6-year-old child now? Oh, you're a daddy. You're a daddy. Give me a fucking break, dude. You're a man child. You're literally a man child.
Kevin,
you're one of these goobers who thinks, oh, I'll wear my workout clothes and I'll sound super tough I'll flex that bicep and that'll prove. What's that going to prove for shit, dude? What's that going to prove for shit, dude? We're literally having a debate about international relations. And you're like, oh, let's bring out the guns. Let's bring out the guns.
Let's reel it in.
The empire that you're defending in China, your guns are like from the 1950s, dude.
I just want to talk about industrialization.
My class reductionism, constantly. My economic reductionism. Economic reductionism. Just ignore all other factors of the international order, bro.
Wait, okay. That was fun. Okay. Now let's go back to one at a time. So go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the point I actually wanted to make. So Kevin is making it seem like the U.S. is a communist state in which all of our economic policies are pursued on the basis of a central political interest. But actually, that's not how it works. The reason why companies moved to China and the reason why you had this general trend of industrialization, and it wasn't just China, it was Mexico and other countries, was because it was not only in the interests of the capitalists within America to, because of the cheaper cost of labor, move to these foreign countries. It was the only way to offset the international economic crisis that was started in the 1970s, specifically with the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. And this is what's responsible for the emergence of what we call neoliberalism as we know it. Had China not opened up to the West, it's a dual it's a dual situation of dependence. There would have been a widespread economic crisis, which the political orders within the West wouldn't have been able to survive. So these Western corporations needed to go move to China because they needed to offset the falling rate of profit that was responsible for the crisis in the 1970s. If you want to the reason I call you an anarchist, Kevin, is because if Washington listened to you, you would literally destroy the American empire and the entire global order as we know it, which is why, Kevin, despite us debating, I wish and pray for nothing more than for Washington to listen to a guy like you, because you will hasten the collapse of the American empire. So, like, if you say, okay, we made China, we can end them, please try to end them. Trump was trying to do it. The Chinese called him Comrade Trump because he strengthened and invigorated the national Chinese industry so effectively by doing
he didn't
it.
really try. He didn't blockade China. I would blockade China.
Try as hard as you want, Kev. You are just going to rally the passion of the Chinese people to rise to heights that that no people on earth have ever seen before.
Well, they've been rallying against your regime. They've risen up in Hong Kong, they've risen up in Xinjiang, and they've been oppressed and quelled.
No, they didn't.
So
your
regime is a handful of elite oligarchs.
The only people who rose up in
Beijing
were Al-Qaeda affiliated, Gulf-sponsored terrorists.
Oh, so we're going to need some proof on that. Really? Al-Qaeda affiliated? Al-Qaeda affiliated.
Listen.
Al-Qaeda affiliated.
Hong Kong was a British colony. It doesn't represent the majority of the Chinese people. I don't know why you're using Hong Kong as an example.
It's an example of people rising up for democracy and being shut down by the regime.
You don't understand. You don't even understand what you're talking about. Hong Kong has a different system than China. It's just one country, two systems, right?
That's how it was until recently.
It's not. And listen, you know why Hong Kong is such a bad example for you is that there are Communist Party theorists within China who acutely understand that one of the biggest impetuses of the Hong Kong uprising was also economic dissatisfaction and economic discontent. And one of the reasons for that is because there's no land in Hong Kong. There's no affordable housing in Hong Kong. So people are kind of like packed like sardines in this kind of unlivable way. And one of the reasons for that is because China respects Hong Kong's sovereignty and at least being able to have a different system, there can be no economic reforms like a land reform or any socialistic policies that can allow Hong Kongers to enjoy the same guarantee and basic social safety as mainland China.
They have a higher GDP. They have a higher GDP per capita.
I know. You're not listening to what I'm saying.
You're going to argue Chongqing is better than Hong
Kevin,
Kong?
Shut up.
Economically?
I'm not arguing.
Bro, they're richer than the mainland by a lot.
Listen carefully to what I said. I did not say people in the mainland are more wealthy. They're not. They're much poorer. But they have more security in the form of having these guaranteed landed plots that they can always go back to when they lose their job, or they have that kind of safety and security. In Hong Kong, people don't own land. They don't have any kind of guarantee for a minimal dignified life. Now, relatively speaking, people in Hong Kong are obviously much more wealthier. It's much more advanced than most of the mainland. Although that's changing very rapidly, right? The mainland is catching up, obviously. But that's not the point I was trying to say. The point I was trying to say is that the number one source of civil unrest is actually not just poverty. Because remember, poverty is always relative. It's economic turmoil. It's relative economic turmoil and instability. When people no longer have the basic standard of living that they expect they should, that's really the source of a lot of the political discontent. And Hong Kong, because it's not run or governed by a socialist system, isn't able to initiate the necessary economic reforms that are going to disempower the landlords of Hong Kong who own most of the land and own it on the basis of profit. Because of that, there's going to be economic discontent in places like Hong Kong. But that's why you don't see that same level of strife or discontent in the mainland.
Why should people that worked and purchased property, why should they be disempowered? Like, so you're a communist. You're literally anti-land.
I'm a communist because my position in relation to the relation between politics and the economy is that the government should do whatever supports and benefits the overwhelming majority of the people they govern.
But that's just a cope that you're not a billionaire. That's just a cope that you're not a billionaire. If you were a billionaire, you wouldn't be a communist. You'd be like,
listen,
yeah, this
Kevin,
is my money.
Read my words carefully. Most people are not billionaires. If a government is going to effectively represent the interests of its people, it has to recognize that most people are not billionaires. So, you know,
well, it's not just about being a billionaire. I was talking about landlords. Most of those landlords are not billionaires either. My point is that capitalism gives you the opportunity. Capitalism gives you the opportunity to make something of yourself
land ownership
rise
in Hong Kong
in your own way. The communist system in China quells you down if you express anything that diverges from the party line. You talk about this as if it's all about my money and it's all about my land. It's like, no. Ideology is a factor here that I think is worth discussing, because you talked about how the new order emerging. So that's not how this works, Haz. You don't just get to talk the whole time, and then the second I start talking, you constantly interrupt me like a little monkey. I'm talking right now, so you stay in your place. So here's the deal. The ideological differences between the old order, between the old order and the new order that you're talking about emerging has not been taken into account. You're just talking about my economics. My economics are different. My polls are different. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. We live in a world that is divided between islands of freedom and continents of slavery, and your solution is just ignore ideological differences, and therefore we can have peace in the system. That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit, and that is the most idealist, divorced from reality understanding of power relations. You don't get it. You don't get it. You don't get the role of ideology here. You just simply don't. You think that we can just put ideological differences aside.
You already repeated that a million times. I heard you loud and clear, Kevin. Now I get to respond. So, Kevin, here's the issue here, right? The first thing is that you notice a tendency with you. Whenever we get fixated on a specific line of argumentation, you pivot. You pivot to a billion.
Well, no, that's you. You're the one who pivoted away from the definition of polarity because you lost.
Want to talk about,
and that was your cope. That was your cope, Haz. So have at it, Haz. Have at it, Haz. You can keep pivoting. Break your ankle, bro, with those pivots, bro.
Can you mute this guy?
No, you. No, you. No, you.
Mute this guy.
No, you. No, you.
Mute him.
No, you. Oh, yeah. Big tanky Haz. Big tanky Haz. Mute the opposition. No, 100% Stalinist. 100% tanky.
You should be muted. Shut up.
Right? We got the monkey gang. We got the monkey gang, right?
I focus on meat and potatoes. Kevin pivots and detracts to a trillion other topics. Let's get back to the relevant
you lost on the definition. So you're like,
shut the fuck up.
Semantics. No, you.
Shut the fuck up. 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 Shut the fuck up.
No, you.
Okay, the lady stepping in.
No, you, Haz.
The lady stepping in. Go ahead, Brittany.
Oh, yeah. Okay, no. Let's just keep going. Go
keep going. Okay. Well, basically, what I was pointing out.
Can you mute this guy? He doesn't know how to shut up.
No, you.
Look, I would love to just yell at him and just shout with him, but there's actual content.
We know, Haz. We know,
There's actual meat and potatoes. I want to mute him. Just mute him. There's actual meat and potatoes I want to address here. Like, I actually want to argue about this stuff, right? So that's why I'm trying to bring it back. So you were talking about the situation of land in Hong Kong and that, well, most are not billionaires. I don't know if that's true, but you have to understand that Hong Kong land is overwhelmingly monopolized in the hands of a few. So it's not decentralized in the way you're trying to imply. The second thing is because you had to concede on that point, now you're trying to say I'm an economic.
I didn't concede. How did I concede? You're literally an anti-capitalist.
Just mute him. Just mute him, please. What is this? This is nonsense. So the second thing is that you had to concede and then go veer off into this territory about how, well, material reality is not all that matters. Ideological realities matter too. And in China, you can't speak in a way that is against the party line. But that is patently false. People in China have a very far and wide-ranging range of expression, even more than America, actually. Not because they have the
bullshit.
Right to. What is? How is
that's bullshit?
How is
they're able to unmute themselves.
They're a single party.
Shut the fuck up! You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
They're a single party. Pause. Pause. They're a single party.
We're not debating anymore. You want to fucking play this game? You fucking
dictatorship.
stupid bitch.
Pause.
I've been
Are you fucking
trying to fucking argue this whole
how much of a child do you have to be to consider China to have a more pluralistic democracy?
I've been actually. You guys got the content out of that, so let's go back to the debate now.
So basically, yes, I do believe that. Actually, I do believe that in China, people's authentic views and opinions are able to give way better and more representative expression than in countries like America, where people didn't even fucking know what they want. They're not even informed to be in tune with their actual interests as a people. That's why America gets into fucking online debates over frivolous bullshit that's in nowhere near their actual authentic feelings and interests. They just get caught up in culture wars that are just existing for their own sake. It's not even because it's what they really believe anymore. People just take sides because it's like a sports team at this point between the Democrats and Republicans. So yeah, in China, when they don't have all of that useless fucking bickering, they can actually get to the business of actually expressing what they authentically view the world and what they authentically want from the state. And the state is very attentive to what Chinese people say, to their protests and their various objections and suggestions. And they integrate all of those things in their 5-year plans, among other policies. So yes, China's a far more robustly democratic country than America. It's a far more democratic country in terms of actually representing what the majority of people actually think and believe.
So you mentioned the culture war. You think, oh, it's frivolous or whatever. I actually agree to some extent there. And I've done videos in the past saying how the culture war is unwinnable for conservatives. It's pointless. It's just a massive, endless cope where every time we gain ground, they're like, ooh, well, we're going to try to undo this or try to undo that to get a little bit ground back. Or maybe we'll get one person on the Supreme Court to overturn stuff for a few years. And then the liberals keep winning and winning and winning. In 50 years, it's going to be the most conservatives in America are going to be pro-trans rights, for example. So it's a lost cause for conservatives. So I actually agree that the culture war shouldn't matter. The conservatives should just give up. They're never going to win. But China, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have that because you're not allowed to be liberal over there. Like if you advocate for what I want, I'm a moral universalist, liberal universalist, I would get imprisoned for advocating for gay rights, trans rights, women's rights in China, for example. They would consider me a dissident, even if I didn't even talk about the party per se, even if I wasn't just advocating for democracy, just advocating for Uyghur rights, for example. Immediately going to jail. And so Haas is going to try to gaslight you here and try to say how China is a better representation of expression because there's no culture war. The reason why there's no real culture war is that the Communist Party jails anybody that's not a conservative communist. So
yeah, so there's 3 prongs about why that's a stupid argument. The first one lies in the fact that if China jails all LGBT activists, it's really weird how you can actually look and see that within China, there are LGBT organizations and advocacy groups and activists that are not in jail. So it's a patent lie that China is just going to jail anyone who advocates for the rights of sexual minorities. The reason why it's not really widespread within China is because, and this is true, the majority of Chinese people are just not interested in this topic. They're just not. They're not enthralled by it in the way America is. And the reason why Americans are enthralled by it is because it's been overly politicized by the Democrats and the Republicans. The second thing regarding Uyghur rights, well, that's extremely ambiguous. I mean, Uyghur rights can fall under the umbrella of Al-Qaeda, right? That Uyghurs should have the right to have an Islamic state that is completely separate from China, violating the one China policy. So what is that? What exactly is meant by Uyghur rights would determine whether or not you would be imprisoned or whether you would face repercussions. The third thing is that shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
You asked a question.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I didn't finish my fucking point. Shut the fuck up.
You asked a question, I answered.
Kevin, shut the fuck up.
No, you, Haas. No, you,
Shut
Haas.
the fuck up.
No, you, Haas.
Shut the fuck up. Kevin, is anyone moderating this? Like, I don't interrupt him, and he interrupts me.
Except you do.
Because he's an anarchist. He's an anarchist, and he can't follow
anarchist statist, right?
Because you can't follow fucking rules. Just follow the rules of the fucking platform you're on.
You, Haas. You're the one shipping out.
Well, okay. All right. Just let him finish before it gets riled up again. All right, so go ahead.
Yeah. So the third thing, what you're saying is that, oh, in China, the reason there's no culture war is because the government just censors it. If the Chinese people were actually authentically and organically inclined to have culture wars, maybe at first it would be censored. And this is how all these trends work in China. But eventually the government would have to assent to what the overwhelming majority of people want. So, no. And that's just assuming we even buy into this idea that culture wars in general are being censored in China. The truth is that the Chinese people do not give a fuck about the things that seem to interest Americans online. Chinese people spend their time online talking about history and civilizations and religions and important things like that. Americans spend their time online arguing over bathrooms. So that's really the difference. The Chinese people just are not interested. They just don't care.
Well, that's such an essentialist and overgeneralization. There are people in America that have arguments about philosophy online, and there are people in China that have arguments about who killed better in Fortnite after they use their VPN and everything. So the idea that China, that netizens or whatever over there are more intellectual than people in America online, that's not really true. The reason why you don't really see a culture war unfolding is that liberal voices are literally oppressed in China, whereas in America, liberals are winning and conservatives are angry and furious and coping and fuming and dooming because they see women being empowered. They see LGBT people having rights. They see blacks having equal rights, for example. And they look at that and they see their old way where they were on top, and they see that as basically vanishing from them, and they're pissed about it. Now, I agree that the culture war shouldn't really be that much of a thing in America. We should just have a socially liberal society in which you're free to live your truth. They don't have that in China. Haas's explanation is that the Chinese people don't care about it. Well, that's easy enough to say if you're a straight, conforming person who follows the party in China. If you're anybody who deviates from that, that's not true, though. And you mentioned, oh, what are Uyghur rights? What are Uyghur rights? The rights not to be forced sterilized, the rights not to have your children taken away from you, the rights not to be sent to a detention center to be brainwashed and tortured. And if it so happens, and I've said this before, if it so happens that there are cases, and there have been in the past cases of terrorism against China, I support terrorism against Chinese military and police forces. I don't support it against Chinese civilians, but if that's what it takes to achieve liberation, I support their liberation. Just as I support Kurdish liberation, they are the good guys here. The regime is the bad guys. The behavior of the regime is not going to change. The regime has to be changed. So, and I support working with anybody to accomplish that, even if we got other disagreements. They're an ally here against China. So,
before we address everything, I just want to say I am so fascinated at how neoconservatives finally came around to embracing their true allies, Al Qaeda. So that's
Al
really
Qaeda. There's no Al Qaeda.
Shut up.
No Al Qaeda.
I let you say a bunch of dumb shit. Shut the fuck up.
Shut
up. No one cares. Shut up.
Not a neocon.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I'm nowhere near done. We're just getting started with all this dumb shit you just said. So you're actually made the claim that we cannot say that Chinese people are more informed because there are exceptions within America and there are exceptions within China. But we're not talking about exceptions. We're talking about the overall trend. The overall trend is that Chinese netizens are far more careful, far more thoughtful, and far more intellectual and educated. And, they actually talk about interesting things that matter overwhelmingly, right, as compared to America. So you actually haven't addressed that this is an overall trend, be there that there may be exceptions within both countries. Now, you're saying that liberals are repressed within China. That's interesting because liberals in China are literally given pretty high-ranking posts in academia and media and culture. And much of the discontent against liberalism that's now starting to form the Xi Jinping era, and this is true, if you know Chinese people, you'd understand this, it's coming from below, not even from up top. Chinese people are becoming more fervently patriotic and loyal to not only their country, but to their party and its history than ever before in history. It's comparable almost to the Cultural Revolution. The Chinese people themselves are putting grassroots pressure on the Western-inspired institutions that emerged after the reform and opening up to get rid of and sack and purge and actually struggle against these liberal Western elements that they don't want in their country. Now, as far as individual expression culture wars are concerned, China is not completely culturally hegemonic, but it does represent a shared civilization that's thousands of years old. And there are exceptions within China of individuals who break the mold and go their own way and go their own path. The whole point is that this is never going to be a general trend because China was never an individualistic society. It's not because people are not allowed to do those things. They are. I mean, there's examples of Vice documentaries going to look at subcultures in Shanghai and other big cities. These things exist. It's just not going to represent the major trend within China because, believe it or not, the character of China reflects the character of the Chinese people in the last and final instance. The whole People's Republic and Communist Party is founded on the basis of acknowledging that very premise. And finally, one last thing. Regarding this thing about what would it take to satisfy Uyghur rights, the right not to be kidnapped, the right not to be sterilized, well, then it's even better because there's not even any need for any activists for Uyghur rights because none of those things are being violated in the first place.
So, okay. So we'll start off with what Haas mentioned first, which was the idea that, well, are there some people in China that would have these things like LGBT rights and other stuff as an issue? Yeah. But is it the majority? No. Well, the thing about rights is that they exist to protect those that are directly affected, right? So, for example, the right to not be arrested in the middle of the night without a warrant, that's a thing that you should care about and defend, even if you're not the one that the police are coming to tonight to arrest. Likewise with LGBT rights, just because you're not gay doesn't mean that you shouldn't support them. This is about liberalism. This is about the Enlightenment. This is about the idea of humanism, the idea that all people have dignity and should have equal protection under the law, something that doesn't exist in communist China. Haas mentioned that, well, the Chinese people are more patriotic now and everything. They're more brainwashed in large to support the party. That's true. Now, a lot of people don't buy the party's propaganda, but hundreds of millions of people do. You could say the same thing about North Korea. That doesn't mean that they're not an enemy. That doesn't mean that the regime is not to be removed from power and the people liberated. You can liberate people who would be better off liberated, even if they say right now that they're against that. Obviously, I mean, they literally live with a gun to their head, and even if they have their own volition say that they support the regime, if they were to see the alternative with their own eyes, with free access to information, they would obviously choose the West. The West offers the highest standard of living, the highest dignification of humanity, and the best rights for everybody. And additionally, to get to the final point about the Uyghur genocide, so we have satellite photos documenting this. We have interviews of those who have been in the camps or have family that are in the camps. We have video footage showing the camps. I don't see how we can deny that 2 million people have been detained against their will. That's just not something that you can cover up in this era. Hitler had a hard time covering up the Holocaust, and we have access to satellites now. So how can you deny this? How can you say that there's no proof of this? Yet you throw around accusations that they're working with Al-Qaeda, which you obviously have no proof for. So, and again, I've also said if they did terrorism against the party, they're justified to do it. They're defending themselves. So.
Oh boy. Okay. You done, Kevin?
Right now, yeah.
Yeah. So Kevin, first of all, the point is that I just mentioned that those individual exceptions are not being persecuted within China. So that was the whole point. But it's interesting that you develop this contradiction. On the one hand, you want absolute rights, unconditional rights to protect minorities, right? The Western contrived view of rights, it actually doesn't come from Renaissance humanism. It comes from Anglo-Saxon metaphysics in the 17th century, but that's regardless.
Who cares where it came from?
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I'm going to start interrupting you in your turns too.
Okay.
We're going to see how you like it. But anyway,
cool. Been doing it all night.
Yeah. So no, I haven't. I let you talk. That whole fucking diatribe you just did, I let you talk. So second of all, China doesn't focus on abstract unconditional rights because in actual material reality, no rights are unconditional. China focuses more on the content of rights. Westerners claim that they want the right to freedom and liberty, things that have no substantive content, things that have no determinate being, to the right to be what, the right to do what. China's a country that is attuned to what its people are and to who it is. So it doesn't need to create abstractly negatively contrived, abstract formal rights that are applied in every circumstance and situation, because China is a living, and it's a country ruled by a living people and not a dead doctrine, not a dead letter. So it's really important we understand what we're talking about. Just because there are no absolute rights within China doesn't mean the government acts arbitrarily. It acts according to the determinate content and determinate being of the Chinese people themselves, conceived not as a sum total of individual atoms, but as a real civilizational and collective being. Now, you mentioned regarding this business of the Uyghur genocide, so-called Uyghur genocide, that you have satellite photos and so on. But if you actually evaluate the content of those satellite photos, they don't prove the existence of any of the claims made by those claiming the Uyghurs are being subject to a genocide. You have the establishment of schools and institutions and buildings and centers and factories, things that are completely removed from the subject whatsoever, have been, by satellite photos, been accused of being, concentration camps. And there's many cases of this. There's many inconsistencies and plot holes in all of the various claims being made that so-called justify the claim of an Uyghur genocide. Finally, the idea that you're saying there's no connection between the ETIM separatists and Al-Qaeda, that there's no proof of this connection, is just about the most laughably stupid and uninformed fucking thing I've heard in like a month. I mean, even American State Department would have to admit that, yes, there does exist a connection between the two, which is why the ETIM used to be listed as a designated terrorist organization, not just by China, but by the United States of America, because of its affiliations and ties to Al-Qaeda. So I really can't believe how you could say such an uninformed and ignorant thing when it's like self-evident to everyone that, yes, Al-Qaeda has been working in Xinjiang, that there are connections between Uyghur separatists and Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's like no one has ever denied that except you, to the extent of my knowledge.
You had claimed basically that the Uyghurs are working with Al-Qaeda. It's like, okay, there's a tiny...
To be clear, I didn't say the Uyghurs are working with Al-Qaeda. I said a tiny minority of Uyghur separatists who do not represent the majority of Uyghurs were working with Al-Qaeda, and that's a fact.
Okay, well, on that point, they're justified in doing so. And in that particular case of Uyghurs versus the CCP, Al-Qaeda's on the good side. So, okay. They're on the bad side against America.
I did, Kevin, was point out the irony of a person calling themselves a neocon, worshiping.
I don't call myself a neocon.
Whatever. You worship and you hold as a model the Bush era of interventionist unilateral politics. Well, guess what? I mean, like, the Bush era was defined by the war on terror, and Osama bin Laden was the primary villain of the Bush era. So it's just really funny that that you're trying to like rep that, and at the same time it's coming full circle, and it turns out like you're best friends with Osama bin Laden.
No.
Best friends with
That's
Al-Qaeda.
bullshit.
Now, you know?
I can recognize. I can recognize
I grew up during the war on terror.
The consequence.
Yeah.
The consequence of what Al-Qaeda does against the CCP is a net good, but what they do in Afghanistan and what they do elsewhere is a net bad.
I get that you support them against the CCP.
Against
you
the
have
CCP.
to understand, anyone who grew up during the war on terror, like me, and who's like familiar with what defined the Bush era, to see a self-proclaimed liberal hawk, as you're calling yourself now. I know all the anarchists have special snowflake terms. To see someone like that identify with, say that they support Al-Qaeda is just fucking hilarious. If that's not ironic to you, then
the CCP. I don't know what to tell you. I don't support Al-Qaeda against the West. I support Uyghurs doing whatever they can to free themselves of their oppression. If I was oppressed
let me ask you a question.
If I was oppressed in East Turkestan, basically in that region, you look at the detainees by the millions, and you deny. You deny this mass detention. Yet it is a thing. It is documented. There are interviews, and we have satellites. You took issue with the satellites, except satellites don't prove anything on their own, but augmenting other evidence, they can paint a picture of what's unfolding on the ground.
There's absolutely no evidence.
But that's not true, Haas.
Yeah, there is.
You don't even believe that.
And
here's
Kevin,
the thing.
I know you support.
But here's the thing.
So Kevin, you support.
If I lived there, if I lived there and this was being done to me and my people, you can bet you I'd be working with. I would work with the Russians if they offered help.
So let me ask you a question. Would you do it if you were living in Gaza?
If I was in Gaza, what do you mean?
Like if you were living under the conditions in Gaza, would you also do the same thing you're saying now?
Yeah, I would support Israel. I would work with Israel to try to get rid of Hamas.
No. You would have to support the Palestinian terrorists, as you would call them, right?
No, because Israel is the liberator. I care about the relationship between the liberator and the oppressor.
You support national liberation so much. Israel's the liberator. That's why they're building settlements in the West Bank.
That's why they're building settlements in the West Bank. So guys, between the liberator
these are the people who talk about
Gaza. Gaza is oppressed by Hamas, not by Israel.
What about the West Bank? What about the West Bank?
By Israel.
So wait,
the West
is
Bank
Hamas building settlements in the West Bank and kicking people out of their homes?
Not Hamas. The West Bank is oppressed by the Palestinian Authority.
So who's building settlements and kicking people out of their homes? Is it the Palestinian Authority? I support a one-state
solution. Like everybody would be better off under Israel. Like,
I'm not asking. Okay, then everyone would be better under China. Everyone would be better under China.
That's not true. Communism is depraved and evil.
Because you have a double standard. So anyway, we know you don't.
No, it's not a double standard.
We know you don't. Listen, Kevin.
It's not.
We know you don't care about. You don't care about national liberation.
It's not.
You don't care about national liberation. Don't come at me with this business. Oh, if I was living in Xinjiang, I would do anything by any means necessary.
It's not a double standard.
Palestine or Gaza, the tune changed suddenly, right?
But it's not a double standard.
The fucking hypocrisy is incredible. You don't give a shit.
It's not a double standard.
You don't give a shit about people being oppressed. You just want. You're just against China because Anglo-Saxon so-called civilization is on the decline. You just hate China. You don't care about Muslims. You don't care about oppressed people.
This is bullshit.
No, that's not bullshit. It's not fucking bullshit, Kevin.
It's not a double standard to support liberalism everywhere. It's not a double standard to support liberalism everywhere.
What is so liberal about Israel's actions in Palestine? Nothing.
Wait, are you kidding me?
Liberalism is unsustainable.
My criticism of Israel
is collapsing.
Liberalism is collapsing. Enough. They're not actually hawkish enough on fighting the PA and Hamas.
Yeah, you're an anarchist. We get it.
No.
So here's the thing.
Against Netanyahu, for sure. Netanyahu was against liberating them.
You want chaos. I get it. You want chaos. You're an extremist anarchist.
I want order. I want a world liberal order. I actually want the opposite of chaos.
No one cares what you want.
You're the one who wants chaos. You're the one who wants a multipolar order, which is
unsustainable. No one cares what you want. No, I don't have to want the multipolar order. One is emerging objectively. I'm just acknowledging
that. And I'm here to try to argue for America to preserve its hegemony. Preserve its hegemony.
Keep trying. Are you doing a good job in this debate?
You gonna keep on chipping out?
Are you doing?
What he's gonna say.
You keep chipping out.
Kevin, say whatever he's gonna say. Say it quick.
Yeah. No, I was just saying it's not a double standard to support the West in both cases. It's not. So I'm against Hamas, and Hamas is the one oppressing the Palestinian people. And just as it's the case in East Turkestan or Xinjiang, it's the CCP that's oppressing the Uyghur people, and it's the West and allied forces that are trying to liberate them. It's not a double standard to support one group that does bad things here but does good things elsewhere. You can support a group in one case and be against them in another case. That's not a contradiction.
No, it's so hilarious about this double standard.
I'm anti-Al-Qaeda, but I don't blame Uyghurs for doing what they can because the West simply hasn't offered enough support to them.
What's hilarious?
And why is that? Because we're cucked by a bunch of neoliberal corporatists.
Is that in contrast to the situation?
By a bunch of neoliberal corporatists that want that cheap Chinese labor. Because we're cucked by a bunch of neoliberals that want that cheap Chinese labor. Oh, chicken hawk. Yeah, well, why don't you living in China? I'm a chicken hawk. You live in America. Why don't you live?
I'm trying to win this country.
Why don't you?
I want to win this country. I want to build the Communist Party in this country. But anyway,
so you're a fifth column. You're a traitor. Okay, that's why you live in America. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm not breaking any laws, so good luck. So anyway, Kevin.
Not yet. Yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Anyway, Kevin, you live in Canada. You're not even a fucking American. Shut the fuck up. Anyway,
the liberal world transcends America or Canada.
You talk so much about America, you don't even fucking live here.
Canada would be a Soviet gulag colony without America. So I believe in the.
And maybe
when I talk about the liberal order,
Kevin,
I'm not just
you're
talking
not even
about
American. You're not even American. You're not even American.
We're debating the West.
You are not an American. You have the Empire State Building.
Do you deny that Canada is part of the West? Do you deny that Canada is part of the West?
A weeaboo, but
we're
for America.
debating about the West versus China, not America versus China. We're debating about the West.
You told me to leave my country.
China.
You told me to leave my country
versus
Canada.
We're debating about the West versus China. Do you deny that Canada is a part of the Western Hemisphere? Are you that stupid? We're talking about the West.
Kevin, the West is not a country.
We're talking about the West. Canada is a part of the West.
The West is not a country.
We both live in the West.
The West is not a country. Anyway, what's so hilarious
Wait, when did I argue it was a country? We're talking about the West versus China. That's literally the title of the debate. It's literally the title of the debate. The West versus China. You're trying to discount my opinions. You're trying to discount my opinions because I live in the West, but I support the West? How does that make any sense? I support Western interests and I live in the West. That's consistent. You support Chinese interests and you live in the West. That's not consistent. That's not consistent. Go and live in China, dude. Go and live in China if you love it so much.
What's hilarious about your double standard about Palestine and Xinjiang?
Because the West is for progressives. The West is for liberals.
The Palestinians have it way worse off than Uyghurs. Xinjiang has always been part of China.
You can go and live in Xinjiang. Is a wonderful land.
Whereas Israel came to being in 1948, and it's a completely different situation. Uyghurs are not having their homes evicted. They're not being fucking placed in an open-air prison like Gaza. You talk about concentration camps. Gaza's the biggest fucking concentration camp on earth. It's not even fucking comparable.
Move there. You think it's such a wonderful land? Go move there. You think it's so wonderful?
I just BTF you about
You got nukes, dude. You got nukes. You're an absolute phone child. You got nuked. You got nuked. You got vaporized, dude. 100 million degrees, dude. Snoozing and boozing.
So from Hog Takes, it says, Haas, do you admit that China has flaws like one child, which is leading to more old people and shrinking population?
They just recently reversed the one-child policy, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to get into Chinese people's business, but yeah, I mean, for America, I wouldn't want anything like that for America. But China was a different country; it had different developmental needs, and but they are reversing the policy, and it's not a one-child policy anymore. But yeah, there are demographic issues facing all developed and advanced countries. But I think if anyone is uniquely tasked to deal with this issue and confront it, it is the Chinese Communist Party. So I'm confident that they're going to be able to reverse their any impending demographic crisis.
I love that. It exposes the double standard where Haas is like, well, no, I wouldn't want that in my backyard, but for China, well, they have a state, so they can do their own thing. That's relativism. So it's freedom for me, but not for thee. So
no, it means that the Chinese people rule the Chinese people, and that I don't rule over the Chinese people. Well, actually, we have to get into the theory of governance and statehood and how a state actually represents its people. It's obviously not
theories. It sounds like you have a hard time.
It's not through individual atoms just directly controlling themselves. But the fact is, like, I'm not going to decide what policies the Chinese people pursue because that would require me, an American, to exert the power of America to rule over the Chinese people. And
no, not rule over, liberate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just like the Nazis liberated East Europe. Right, we get it. But the issue, Kevin, is that speaking of double standards, you spoke of the need for people to have absolute rights for minorities. And yet, interestingly enough, you said we need absolute rights for minorities. So let me get this straight. On the one hand, listen, look how hilarious Kevin is. On the one hand, he says that it's dictatorship when a government looks out for its people. But at the same time, Kevin thinks he knows what's good for the Chinese and North Korea people even better than themselves. He thinks he knows better than what he literally just want to act as a dictator for the Chinese people. You want to act as a dictator for the Chinese people.
It's like, I work out.
Yeah, it's like, dude, I do work out, Kevin. Kevin, you want to act as a dictator for the Chinese people.
Okay. Yo, how's this?
Law school.
Am I turned up?
Law school.
All right, thank you. And Haas, the way you're talking, it's really hard to understand what you're saying. But okay, from PF Jung, does Haas support gay marriage? What about legalizing weed? Just trying to gauge his personal beliefs on social issues.
I'm not against it, but I don't think it should be forced on any people. I believe in the sovereignty of countries and the sovereignty of nations and states. So it's up to the people living in those countries. Now, in America, the country I live in, I'm not against it. I will not pose resistance to it. But I'm not too interested in sexual politics in general.
Yeah, because he's not affected by it. So isn't that great? He's not affected by it. It doesn't personally affect him.
True.
Dude, you sound like one of those dumb Republican voters who doesn't care about something until it personally affects them. Absolute cringe.
I think that's how most human beings are in general. They stay in their own lane and they focus on what's in their business.
That's not true though. That's an absolute mischaracterization.
You are such a liberator.
Just because you're a sociopath,
you're such a liberator, dude.
The rest of people are. Just because you're a solipsist doesn't mean that the rest of people
first of all, when China acts on behalf of the Chinese people's best interests, it's a dictatorship. But when Kevin does it, it's liberation. That's apparently what we're working with.
If other people don't have the same rights that he has.
Yeah, when China intervenes on behalf of its people, it's a dictatorship. When Kevin intervenes on behalf of everyone in the world, it's liberation. That's what it is.
Ironically, yes, literally. Yeah. That's literally how it works.
Yeah, no, it's not.
That's literally how it works.
No one voted for you. No one voted for you. But no one voted for you.
All right. So from KGP, Kevin, as a self-proclaimed liberal war hawk, would you be willing to join the military and fight factions like the Taliban yourself?
Yeah, so I've been asked this question a ton of times. I've got videos that I've made going over this. When are you joining the military, though? It's a non-argument. It's basically the same as saying, dude, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. You refuse to live to China. You refuse to live under the consequences of what you support. You refuse to live under the consequences of what you support. No. You're the coward. You're the one advocating for America to be like China, yet you refuse to actually live in a dictatorship yourself. You refuse to live in a dictatorship yourself. You refuse to live in a dictatorship yourself.
I would live in China. I would live in China.
Okay, so go fucking do it. So to answer this stupid question, I get asked this a lot. Dude, shut the fuck up. Dude, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Somebody mute Haas so I can actually answer.
Are you mad? Are you mad?
Let him answer. Do this child bullshit.
Mute Haas. These questions.
Yeah, mute Haas.
Okay, just go. Just say what you're gonna say. Go.
Yeah, so basically, it's like saying to somebody, "Oh, well, you support the legalization of marijuana, but you're not a judge. You don't work in the court system. So therefore, how can you have an opinion on that? Oh, you're against crime, but you're not a police officer. How can you have an opinion on that? Likewise here. Oh, you have opinions on international relations, but you're not a soldier. Which, by the way, that doesn't even work because being a soldier and being a foreign policy analyst or being a foreign policy content creator are two different fields. You could do both. You could do one. You could do the other. The skills that go into being a soldier, the skills that go into studying international relations are two different. They're literally two different fields. As far as to answer the question of, well, what about the fight against the Taliban? What difference would it make? Like, let's say that I join the military tomorrow. Are we going to liberate North Korea and the Taliban? No, Canada pulled out in 2014. So how, it literally wouldn't make a difference. So in terms of the material difference of what that would do, it would do literally jack shit. I can do more here changing people's minds than I would trying to learn a new skill to go and fight the Taliban when we're not even fighting the Taliban.
Whose minds are you changing?
So whose minds am I changing? I kill people every week, dude. I kill people every week, and I'm going to be doing this for like 50 years, dude.
How many people?
How many people are you changing? How many
Way more than you ever will in your whole life.
But that's not true. You're probably changing a few more minds right now.
Not a few, Kevin.
50 years.
Kevin.
After you're like a D-rated...
Kevin, 800 people are watching you right now. It's quite a few more than
who just deep throats mics on.
Yeah, Kevin. It's not a few. It's quite a few. It's quite a few more.
I mean,
quite
you
a few.
Talk about your Westphalian fetish. This dude, he deep throats his mic as he gets off to the Westphalian.
You're getting dominated. That's what it's like to be dominated.
No, you got nuked. You got nuked.
You got dominated. You got dominated.
All right.
You got absolutely nuked. You got absolutely nuked.
All right.
From Pastor has spent a significant amount of his time and energy protecting gay and trans people in his server and community. What the fuck have you done, Kevin?
What have I done? Wait, hold on a second. He uses all kinds of, even if not himself, I've seen the people in his Discord using homophobic remarks, for example, that they directed those against me as I've been there before. This was months ago. There's a lot of homophobia, a lot of cost reductionism, and at the end of the day, he'll even tell you he really doesn't care or stand in solidarity.
He said class reductionism.
Shut the fuck up. He doesn't care about standing in solidarity.
He's a leftist.
No. He thinks it's a big joke. As far as what have I done? I've promoted the liberation and the empowerment of sexual minorities around the world, from Afghanistan to Iran to North Korea. And this guy here, he's all about his communism, but he will not go and live in China. He will not.
Why not? I live in China. I live in China.
Then do it. Prove it, dude. Prove it. Fucking prove it.
I can't get citizenship. They don't want me. They don't want me.
Then go and live in a different dictatorship. Get the fuck out of the West.
What will I be for them?
That you don't support.
I'm trying to make America communist.
So yeah. So you're a fifth column, and we should recognize you as the enemy. Okay. So
you live in Canada. You live in Canada. Focus on your own country.
You're fucking kidding me, dude.
We live in Canada.
We've kicked people out of our community.
You live in Canada, dude.
Bigotry towards LGBT minorities. I actually support LGBT people in China. Haas does not. He says he doesn't give a shit about
That's not true. What do you mean support?
You said you did.
How do you support what? Support what?
Gentlemen.
You give them money?
Gentlemen.
What do you mean?
Gentlemen. Let's move on. We got it.
All right.
It's
so
all right.
From Black Lennon, question for Kevin: do you deny the labor aristocracy? What do you think of it?
Define the labor aristocracy. Like, that seems like such a LARPy term. That seems like such a LARPy commie term, like labor aristocracy. What is that? The petty? Is that the petty bourgeoisie? Oh, look at this dude! Look at this dude! He's too afraid to go and live in a dictatorship. He's too afraid to go and live in a dictatorship. So fucking bullshit.
Saying that no one doxed your phone number. That number you posted was telemarketer number.
That's bullshit. I've gotten numbers from dozens upon dozens of different spoof phone numbers, leaving schizophrenic, demonic voice messages with the voice of that dude Kanzik earlier, that exact voice. You're going to try to tell me that it was a telemarketer who said, oh, that the neolibs were coming to your store tomorrow. Yeah, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. That's not a telemarketer. So stop trying to gaslight me and stop trying to gaslight the audience. It's fucking bullshit.
So from CP for SPP, if people reject human rights and the Western liberalism, would you be willing to treat them as equals? It sounds as if unless they adopt your values, you view them bad.
Yeah, so people don't reject human rights. Regimes speak on behalf of people.
Yes, they do actually.
No. That's bullshit, dude. You're so unbelievably unhinged. You can't even stay quiet for 2 seconds. You can't even stay quiet for 2 seconds. Loser.
What about you? Constantly interrupting
You're a loser. You
can't even. You had to be kicked out. You had to be kicked out. You were interrupting so much.
The question was for Kevin.
The question was not addressed at you. So calm the fuck down, Haas. So to answer the question, shut the fuck up. To answer the question, shut the fuck up. The question was asking, dude, you're the one who literally wants to live under a dictatorship, but won't do it himself because then he loses gaming PC and all that kind of bullshit.
I don't game.
That's okay. You're the one who was like, oh, we want a $5,000 gaming PC. You literally said that on that stream where you streamed my channel for 6 hours.
That's literally not true.
Fuming and dooming. No, it is
true.
That's
literally not true.
It's absolutely true, dude.
Prove it. Prove I paid $5,000.
It was on your nomadic communism
stream. Prove I paid $5,000. I paid $5,000?
No, that's what you said. That's what you said.
I didn't.
That was a while ago. No, that's anyway.
No, I didn't. I didn't pay.
What was the question again? What was the question? Was asking about people rejecting human rights. So people don't reject human rights. Nobody's about to be tortured in the middle of the night and says, I don't want Western habeas corpus. That's not a thing that happens. Dictators like Kim and Xi and the Ayatollah, they claim to speak for their people and say, no, we don't want that. That's not for our people. Our people are too stupid for democracy. That's like what Xi Jinping will say. But that's
not
But that's not a legitimate statement.
He never
They're
said
not
it.
actually representing their people.
Yes,
they're
there is.
lording over their people. And
Look at the opinion
managing a
polls,
massive
surveys
police
of the
state
Chinese people.
to keep them down.
China's
So
people overwhelmingly
this
support government.
idea that Chinese people
support the government
the idea
overwhelmingly.
that
They have
Chinese-
studies.
The idea that Chinese people, and communist-backed studies don't count.
No,
idea
they're not
that
communist-backed. They're
the
Western-backed
idea-
studies.
The idea,
The Western press
Juche-
admits
the
it.
Juche study group, the Juche study
The
group,
Western press admits it. The Western press admits it.
Dear leader, bro. They love the fucking dear leader, bro.
Harvard, Harvard.
Dude, yeah, and there are commies that work in higher academia too.
Oh, so communists are the ones. Okay, got it.
There are sympathizers with China in various parts.
Is that
of
a
society,
Russian conspiracy
like
theory? That must have been from a Russian room.
As far as to answer the question, that was posed to me and not posed to Haas, people do not reject human rights. Their oppressors speak for them and say they don't want that here. And then Westphalian deep throat Mike deep throaters like Haas will say, "Oh, it's their Westphalian."
The evidence says the contrary. The evidence says the contrary. If you want to talk about me, then I'm here to talk. Finish your point. Why are you talking about me? Finish your point.
Nobody rejects human rights.
Yeah, the studies show they do.
Dictators reject
The studies show they do.
Dictators, only oppressors.
Yes, they do reject Western human rights.
This is not a
The
thing.
studies show it.
It's not a thing. That's
Yes,
not
it
a
is.
thing. And they've been brainwashed since they were born to parent.
So they do. So they're brainwashed, but they do support it. They do support it. I'm saying they're brainwashed. He conceded. He conceded on the point. He conceded.
That is not.
He conceded.
I didn't concede.
Yeah, you did.
I did not concede.
You conceded.
I did not concede.
He conceded that they were brainwashed.
That's
the reason.
Would I support?
You conceded.
World human rights, and that means you have to remove regimes from power that stand in the way of that. That means you have to remove regimes from power that
Couldn't even do
stand in the way of
Afghanistan.
that.
Let's shut
These
it down.
regimes are
Getting
not
to a
legitimate
point.
voices.
Insufferable.
That's not a legitimate thing. I do not recognize their sovereignty. The sovereignty can be earned and it can be forfeited. The CCP forfeited their sovereignty. They do not have a legitimate voice here. And brainwashed people that say that under threat of death are not somebody that you would ask a serious opinion to. They're hostages and they must be liberated. So it's really as simple as that.
Yeah, they're under threat of death, guys.
Well, yeah, literally. And you deny the genocide.
Arrested journalists in 2020 in the world. So how can you believe their polls when they control the press internally?
Yeah, it has the most arrested journalists, but those journalists don't number that high in numbers. And second of all, who says journalists are a sacred class that cannot violate laws? Journalists who lie and smear and spread misinformation. I'm not against them being held accountable. So they should be
tortured and murdered? So they should be tortured and
No.
murdered?
The evidence doesn't say that they're being tortured and murdered, but that is the most they have. Listen. I want people to understand something too.
Dude, look at Amnesty International.
Here's what's pathetic too. I just defended jailing journalists because I'm like an edgelord, but China doesn't do that. It doesn't really jail journalists. It just has the most journalists imprisoned in the world because, drumroll, China has the most people in the world.
No, it's a higher per capita. It's a higher per capita rate than
America. What's the rating per capita? Give me the specific number.
Far. We can look that up right now.
Look it up now. Journalists per capita arrested.
Because I know it's Russia and China are like right near the top.
Per capita.
We'll try to find this. So let's see.
I think we went to this next question while you do that.
So Eritrea is number one. That makes a lot of sense. Who else is there? So Eritrea, we've got Syria, Iran. We've got, where else is there? Oh, Turkey.
So it's China. Not the most.
Well, no, China's in there.
It's not the most, though.
So
you're wrong. You just conceded. It's not the most.
No.
Did you skip Israel?
The point is, But
You
here's
skipped
the
Israel
point that you're
too.
missing. But here's the point that you're
Why did you
missing.
skip Israel?
No, but here's the point that you're missing.
Why did you skip Israel?
Here's the point that you're
You
missing.
skipped Israel.
Here's the point that you're
Israel's
missing.
on the list too.
Here's the point that you're missing. Even if one journalist
Israel is second. Israel's second on the list.
Even if one journalist,
The
even if
state of
one
Israel
journalist,
is
even
on the
if
second,
one,
is second
even
per
if
capita on the
one-
list.
even if
Israel
one-
is second on the
even if
list, and you
one-
skipped it.
Even
Israel
if
is
one
second on the list, and you
journalist
skipped
in
it.
China is arrested.
Israel is second
that
on the list,
itself
and you
is a
skipped
problem.
Israel. Why did you skip
They're
Israel?
arrested for their
You
work
skipped
and what they're
Israel.
doing and what
Israel.
they're doing.
It was second on the
Oh.
list. You're pathetic.
No, you're pathetic.
Israel
You're
was
absolutely
second on the
pathetic.
list.
Oh, yeah, let's make Israel look bad. Let's just smear Israel. Oh, fuck you, dude. Fuck
It
you.
was from the study
Fuck
you pulled
fuck
up.
fuck
You said
fuck
China
you.
had the most
you.
fucking jail journalists
I
per
didn't say they
capita,
had
and
the
it
most.
doesn't.
I didn't say they had the most. I didn't say they had
Yes,
the
you
most.
did.
The person who wrote the comments said that they had the most. I was saying that they imprison journalists and torture and murder them.
No.
You initially denied it, but then you said, well, no, if they do it, it's okay.
It's not even at a
basically.
high level. No, it's not.
No, no,
They don't.
But the point is,
How do they
literally
torture and
will
kill them?
torture
Which
and
journalist
kill
did China
journalists,
kill?
just like-
Which journalist
just
did China
like-
kill?
Just like in Russia.
Name the name
just
of the
like in
journalist killed by
Russia,
China.
just like in Russia.
Which journalist
Just
was
like
killed
in
by
Russia.
China?
Just
Which
like in
journalist? We're not
Russia.
talking about Russia right
Just
now. We
like
can
in
talk about Russia if you
Just
want.
like in Russia, dude.
We could talk about Russia too, but which journalist was killed in China
Dude,
for being a journalist?
I don't have the names right now.
Because you're
I'd
talking
have
out of
to
your
look it
ass.
up.
Because you're
No,
talking
no,
out of your
no.
ass.
But the point
All
is,
right.
Remember,
We'll
Israel's
come
number
back
2
to
in
it.
per
you
capita.
admit, no, but you admit
All
that
here
China
for the
does it,
tape.
but then you say that you don't actually care because other countries do it, and because, well, China's
That's
going
not
to do
what I
what they're going
said.
to do.
What I said
That's
is
bullshit, dude. That's
What
absolute
I said
bullshit,
that
dude.
is that other countries are claimed to have freedom of expression, like Israel, but are higher on the list as far as
So-
per capita
So
journalist
China at the
sales.
moment, as of 2020, had 47 journalists in prison.
Oh my
Turkey's
God,
at 37.
47?
No.
47?
But see, you don't care because it's a tiny
1.4
number.
billion
But the
people.
point is,
By the
but
way,
point-
1.4
but
billion
that's
people.
so crazy because that's you admitting you don't actually care about rights. You just care about well, if it's a small number that get thrown under the bus.
The
tough luck
US
for them.
has
You
more
don't actually
political
you don't
prisoners than
actually-
China.
You don't actually believe in rights for everybody. You just believe
There's
well,
no
if a small
such
number
thing.
gets tortured,
There's rights
who
for
cares?
everyone
Who
doesn't
cares?
exist in America.
So
Wait, so I want to move on to
Rights
this.
for everyone
Egypt,
doesn't exist in
all right,
America.
all right.
Shut the fuck
You
up.
heard the lady.
Russia,
You heard the lady.
Iran,
Kevin.
China.
Kevin.
shut
China's
the
number
fuck
one.
up.
Kevin, what the
Shut
fuck?
Okay. All right. So I want to move on to this question, and then I want to. We're gonna end it. I'm getting a headache. All right. So from CG, Iraq elected for no human rights. Afghans fought 20 years against human rights. Syria and Venezuela protected themselves from American human rights. Okay.
Okay, so this is a troll, but we could answer it
No,
anyway.
it's factual.
No. That's you're an
Factuality.
absolute gullible goober. You're a gullible
Factuality.
goober. You're gullible goober if you believe
Facts.
that, Haas.
You lost in
That's
Afghanistan.
That's bullshit. No. We didn't lose in
you
Afghanistan. Biden's a weakling who pulled out. America was
weakling.
not defeated. Biden just
You're
lost.
scared to go
Biden
enlist.
just
You're
lost the will to
weakling.
fight and gave
Chicken
up just
hawk.
like Trump.
Chicken
No,
hawk.
that's bullshit.
Chicken
That's
hawk.
bullshit. America could still be there.
Chicken
America
hawk. Then
would
go
still
do
be
it.
there and
Go
could
do
win.
it. Go do it,
that's,
chicken hawk.
that's bullshit. Yeah, well, I'm advocating for the West to go back in there. I'm advocating
Go
for
to
the West to go
Afghanistan,
back in
chicken
there.
hawk.
I'm advocating for
Chicken
the
hawk.
West to go. Yeah, what is me enlisting going to do for that? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So that question,
Chicken hawk.
can you bring the question up again?
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Yeah, this spaz here can't calm himself down. Unbelievable.
I think it might be
Unbelievable.
too far up. I can pull it up another way though. Hold on.
Yeah, because I forgot what the question was asking.
Yeah. Okay. And then we're.
It wasn't a question.
We're
was a
gonna just,
statement.
we're gonna do closing
Well, it
statements.
was a
and then we're gonna end it
stupid
'cause
statement, but I forgot what it said. What were they saying?
It said Iraq
smart.
elected for no human rights. Afghans fought 20 years against human rights. Syria and Venezuela protected themselves from American human rights.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So we'll go one by one. So
No,
Iraq.
we don't have time.
No. Shut
We
the
don't have
fuck up.
time.
I'm
Shut
answering
up.
the question. I'm answering.
It's not
the
a question.
Dude,
It wasn't a
I'm
question.
answering. No. But that's a bullshit
not a
statement.
question.
No. But that's a bullshit statement. So we're just gonna let
It's
that
not
slide.
bullshit, 'cause I'm gonna debate you on it.
critiquing
I'm not
No,
gonna- I'm
fuck
gonna
that,
debate
dude.
you on it
Fuck
then.
that,
We don't have
dude,
time.
Shut up. Dude,
Just
shut up.
take the
I'm
L.
gonna
Take the
answer-
L. You're wrong.
I'm gonna answer.
You're wrong.
I'm gonna answer the statement.
And I'm gonna fact check
I'm gonna
you.
address.
And I'm gonna fact check you.
So to the point about Iraq has been subverted by Iran.
But it's an election. It was a free and fair election.
Shut up.
It was a free and fair election.
Shut up. I'm trying to answer the question.
It wasn't a question. That's the thing. It wasn't a question.
Can you?
It was not a question. It was a statement. No one cares if you agree or not. It was not a question. It was a statement.
Can you mute Haz right now?
Kevin, you have 30 seconds to say whatever you're going to say.
So as far as Iraq was subverted by Iran. Iran should have been invaded and liberated in 2003 as well. As far as Syria, 8 million people fled and had to flee and risk their lives to try to get human rights away from Syria. They rose up against Assad. The West supported that. As far as Venezuela, they're starving to death and they're moving out of the country right now or fighting. As far as the point about Afghanistan, it was 80,000 Taliban fighters fought America, not human rights, but America, and the rest of the country is lorded over by.
All right, that's 30 seconds.
Pakistani imperialism against India.
30
so
seconds
that's all bullshit. That's all bullshit.
The 30 seconds are up. He just lied out of his teeth several times. It was all lies.
All right, moving right along.
We're gonna end this now. So we're gonna give you guys each 2 minutes uninterrupted. All right.
Uninterrupted.
So, Kevin, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. So basically, what we've seen tonight is that Haz over here is basically he's an unironic tanky who has said in this debate that he does not care when I point out instances of how communist China is anathema to freedom. He'll say, well, that's not what the majority want. He'll always use maturity of the majority argument when it's not even a really good argument because the majority aren't able to actually have their voices heard anyway. Because at the end of the day, the Communist Party is about 10% or fewer of the country, and the elites in the party lord over everybody else. And if you don't play game, then you don't get out alive, basically, and you don't make it. And right now they're conducting a genocide where they have forcibly sterilized women. They've detained over 2 million people. And we in the West, in contrast, are islands of freedom, contrasted against continents of slavery, and particularly led by China right now. The West is worth fighting for. The West is worth promoting. The West is worth spreading to all corners of the world because we are the only system that guarantees you, no matter what you believe, no matter where you're born, human rights, democracy, freedom, and the ability to prosper or fail under capitalism. I support a safety net, but this idea that, landlords, Haz at one point said, but those are landlords. It's like, yeah, landlords are people too. Okay, I mean, hot take, but unbelievable. I believe in a free market system. The system in the West has been proven to be the best, and this is evidenced by the successes that China has had on an economic level were only enabled because we decided to do business with them. Now, I supported Nixon doing business with them because they were a useful ally against Soviet Union, but after the Soviets collapsed, they should have become the new enemy. But the neoliberal establishment here refused to do so because they wanted cheap child labor. So we in the West need to start acting in our interest, not in corporate interest, and actually get serious about combating China economically so that it doesn't come to a world war. We made them, we enriched them, and we can end them, and we can blockade them, and we can bankrupt them, and we can liberate them to a democratic liberal order. So thank you for tuning in. Subscribe to me on Twitch, Superpower Broadcasting. Follow me there. You can follow me on Kevin Castley on Twitter.
Thank you.
So I guess the closing statement is this was a unanimous, unambiguous victory for Infrared. He got absolutely blown the fuck out. There's no question, there's no debate about that. But as just a quick closing statement, I think Kevin is a really good example of the fact that the question of the victory of multipolarity over unipolarity and over liberalism in general is not actually a question of contrasting discrete moral positions. It actually shows that liberalism is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. And the only evidence we need to see that is the fact that Kevin, while claiming to be an advocate for the so-called values of liberalism, as at least as it was conceived in modern Europe and in the modern West as we know it, has to go above and beyond to transgress and violate the most basic liberal values of national self-determination and sovereignty. When Kevin speaks about how he wants to impose his specific worldview on the entire peoples of the world, regardless of what they think and regardless of what their say in the matter is, and he even wants to go out of his way to engage in a kind of nuclear holocaust against them, he doesn't sound like a liberal anymore. He sounds like he's Adolf Hitler. He has the passion and bombast of what anyone could clearly recognize is a fascist. Kevin claims that I don't care about the rights of the people living in China, but the axiom of a people being able to have any rights whatsoever is that a people can act as a people, can be sovereign as a people, and the organ and form of that sovereignty is a state, specifically a people's state, which China is one of the only people states on planet Earth. It's a people's republic. It's a republic that is specifically defined for the purpose and aims not of defending abstract sacred rights, but for the interests of the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people themselves. Kevin kept trying to interrupt me. I wanted to have this debate be more or less a little bit civil, but it got to a point where Kevin kept interrupting me so persistently and so often that I just had to come to the realization that this is a person who only understands the language of force and dominance. And in that regard, he was absolutely dominated and was absolutely forced to concede on every substantive point of contention, whether he's willing to admit that after the debate or not. The fact of the matter is that American unipolarity is on the decline. We're entering a multipolar world, and the West is no longer going to be the leader of the entire globe and the world. We have the Chinese civilization, the Russian civilization, the Islamic civilization, Brazilian and Latin American civilization, as well as Europe itself, in contrast to America, which are emerging as poles who represent different peoples with different interests. And the old era of European colonialism is done. It's as simple as that.